Welcome to today's episode, where we'll be exploring M. Scott Peck's groundbreaking work, The Road Less Traveled. A New Psychology of Love, Traditional Values, and Spiritual Growth. Published in 1978, this remarkable book opens with perhaps the most sobering 3 words ever to begin a bestseller: life is difficult. If you're looking for quick fixes or easy answers, this isn't that kind of book. Instead, Peck offers something far more valuable: a profound framework for understanding the challenges of life and how they contribute to our psychological and spiritual development. What's particularly fascinating is how Peck, a psychiatrist by training, weaves together psychological insights with spiritual wisdom, creating a holistic approach to personal growth that has resonated with millions of readers across generations. Today, we'll journey through the 4 major sections of the book: discipline, love, growth and religion, and grace, examining how each builds upon the others to create a comprehensive philosophy for living a fulfilling life. So let's begin where Peck begins, with that challenging but liberating truth. Life is difficult. Part 1. Discipline, the foundation of growth. Peck argues that most of our psychological and emotional problems stem from our attempts to avoid the natural difficulties of life. It's a bit like complaining that water is wet or fire is hot. Difficulties aren't abnormal exceptions to life. They're an inherent part of existence itself. The moment we truly accept this reality, Peck suggests, life paradoxically becomes easier because we stop wasting energy resisting what cannot be changed. But Peck doesn't just leave us with this stoic observation. He offers discipline as the basic tool set for confronting life's problems constructively. Now, when many of us hear discipline, we might think of punishment or rigid control. But Peck reframes discipline as a set of tools that empower us to solve problems and grow through suffering rather than being diminished by it. He identifies 4 essential aspects of discipline: delaying gratification, accepting responsibility, dedication to truth, and balancing. Let's look at each one more closely. Delaying gratification. This first principle might seem obvious: the capacity to postpone immediate pleasure for future benefit. Yet in our instant gratification culture, it's becoming increasingly countercultural. Think about it. We live in a world of one-click shopping, streaming entertainment on demand, and instant messaging. The idea of waiting for anything feels almost antiquated. Peck illustrates this principle with an example that's entered the psychological canon: the marshmallow test. In this famous experiment, children were given a choice: eat 1 marshmallow now, or wait 15 minutes and get 2 marshmallows. The researchers then tracked these children for decades and found something remarkable. Those who could delay gratification at age 4 were more successful in almost every measurable way as adults. But Peck takes this further, suggesting that the ability to delay gratification isn't just about achieving worldly success. It's fundamental to emotional maturity and spiritual growth. When we learn to embrace necessary suffering now for greater good later, we develop what Peck calls psychological muscles. Just as physical exercise involves the willing acceptance of physical discomfort for later benefit, psychological growth requires emotional discomfort in the present for future well-being. I think many of us can relate to this in our own lives. How many times have we put off difficult conversations, necessary medical checkups, or financial planning, only to find that avoiding these discomforts in the short term created much greater suffering down the road? Peck would say, this isn't just procrastination. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how human growth works. Accepting responsibility. The second aspect of discipline involves taking complete responsibility for our problems and our lives. This is where Peck really challenges conventional thinking. He argues that neurosis and character disorders represent opposite ends of a spectrum of responsibility taking. Neurotic individuals tend to assume too much responsibility, blaming themselves for things beyond their control. On the other hand, those with character disorders, which Peck suggests are increasingly common in our society, take too little responsibility, constantly blaming external factors for their problems. What makes this particularly challenging is that most of us lie somewhere on this spectrum, often assuming too much responsibility in some areas while avoiding it in others. The discipline of proper responsibility taking requires constant self-examination and adjustment. Peck shares a revealing anecdote about a couple in marriage counseling. The wife blamed herself for everything wrong in the relationship, while the husband blamed her too. Both needed to recalibrate their sense of responsibility. She needed to recognize which problems weren't hers to solve, while he needed to acknowledge his contribution to their difficulties. There's something deeply liberating about Peck's perspective here. When we fully accept responsibility for our lives, not in a guilt-inducing way, but in an empowered one, we reclaim our agency. Problems stop being things that happen to us and become challenges we can engage with constructively. Dedication to truth. The third component of discipline is perhaps the most challenging: a lifelong commitment to truth. Peck doesn't just mean avoiding outright lies. He's talking about an ongoing willingness to examine our beliefs, assumptions, and perceptions, constantly updating our map of reality to better match the territory. Peck points out that much of our suffering comes from operating with inaccurate or incomplete maps, beliefs about ourselves, others, and how the world works that don't align with reality. The discipline of truth involves the sometimes painful process of revising these maps when they fail us. This requires what Peck calls bracketing, temporarily setting aside our preconceptions to see things as they actually are. It's surprisingly difficult to do. Our minds are naturally conservative, preferring familiar explanations even when they don't quite fit the evidence. I'm reminded of the old joke about the drunk looking for his keys under a streetlight. When someone asks if he's sure he lost them there, he replies, "No, I lost them in the park, but the light is better here." We often look for truth where it's comfortable rather than where it actually resides. What makes dedication to truth a discipline rather than just an intellectual exercise is that it requires emotional courage. Letting go of cherished beliefs or confronting uncomfortable realities about ourselves can be painful. Yet Peck argues that this willingness to endure legitimate suffering is essential for growth. Balancing. The final aspect of discipline is balancing, the ongoing process of adjusting and readjusting our lives as circumstances change. This includes balancing our own needs against those of others, weighing different values against each other, and constantly recalibrating our approaches as we receive new information. Peck uses the metaphor of a good swimmer who never stops making small adjustments to stay afloat. Similarly, psychological balance isn't achieved once and for all, but requires continuous attention and fine-tuning. What I find most insightful about Peck's discussion of balancing is his recognition that life constantly presents us with contradictions and paradoxes. We need both structure and flexibility, independence and connection. work, and rest. True wisdom lies not in resolving these tensions permanently, but in dancing between opposing principles as each situation demands. Part 2. Love, the purpose of growth. Having established discipline as the foundation for growth, Peck moves to what he considers the ultimate purpose of that growth, the capacity to love. But if you're expecting romantic platitudes or sentimental notions, prepare to be challenged. Peck's definition of love is both more rigorous and more profound than what we typically encounter in popular culture. Love, Peck writes, is the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Notice what's missing from this definition. There's no mention of feelings, attraction, or even happiness. For Peck, love is primarily an action and a choice rather than an emotion. This definition immediately distinguishes love from what Peck calls falling in love, that temporary state of euphoria and projection that often initiates romantic relationships. He memorably describes falling in love as a sort of insanity, a biochemical state that evolution has designed to get us together, but that inevitably fades. Real love begins when infatuation ends, when we see the other person clearly, flaws and all, and choose to commit to their growth anyway. Peck identifies several common misconceptions about love that create havoc in our relationships. First, there's the confusion of dependency with love. Many people enter relationships seeking someone to fill their emptiness or meet their needs, mistaking their desperate attachment for love. Peck calls this a form of self-love in disguise. Not because self-love is bad, it's essential, but because instrumentalizing another person for our emotional needs isn't genuine love for them. Then there's the myth that love is a feeling rather than an action. Peck argues that when we base relationships on feelings, we build on shifting sand. Feelings naturally fluctuate, but genuine love involves commitment that transcends emotional states. There will be days when we don't feel loving toward our partners, children, or friends, but love means choosing their welfare regardless. Perhaps most controversially, Peck challenges the romantic notion that love just happens and requires no effort. He suggests that real love always involves effort and will, the decision to extend ourselves for another's growth. This doesn't mean love should feel like a burden, but it does mean it requires conscious choice and sometimes sacrifice. What I find most revolutionary about Peck's view of love is how he connects it to the discipline of truth discussed earlier. For Peck, we cannot truly love someone we don't see clearly. Love requires setting aside our projections, desires, and needs long enough to perceive the actual person before us, their unique qualities, needs, limitations, and potential. This explains why Peck considers genuine listening one of the highest forms of love. When we truly listen, not just waiting for our turn to speak or mentally preparing our response, but fully attending to another's reality, we honor their separate existence. We temporarily set aside our own perspective to enter theirs, which is both an act of discipline and an act of love. Peck also distinguishes between what he calls cathexis, caring about someone because they meet our needs, and genuine love, caring about their welfare independent of what they do for us. A mother who loves her child only when the child behaves according to her expectations is exhibiting cathexis, not love. True parental love includes caring about the child's authentic development, even when it doesn't align with parental dreams or expectations. This section of the book includes some of Peck's most incisive clinical examples. He describes patients who believed they were acting out of love but were actually pursuing dependency, control, or self-interest in disguise. What makes these cases compelling is how normal they seem. These aren't villains but ordinary people, making common mistakes in how they conceptualize and practice love. One particularly poignant case involves a woman who constantly sacrificed her own needs for her family, believing this was the essence of love. Through therapy, she discovered that her selflessness was actually a way of avoiding the harder work of genuine love, developing herself fully so she could engage with her family from a place of strength rather than martyrdom. As Peck puts it, you cannot truly love another if you do not love yourself. Part 3. Growth and Religion. The Integration of Psychology and Spirituality. In the third section of the book, Peck makes his most ambitious move, attempting to integrate psychological growth with spiritual development. This is where the road less traveled most clearly departs from conventional self-help literature and enters the realm of existential and spiritual inquiry. Peck begins by addressing what he sees as a false dichotomy between science, including psychology, and religion. Both, he argues, are concerned with the same fundamental reality, but approach it through different lenses and methodologies. Psychology tends to focus on the mechanisms of the human mind and behavior, while religion addresses questions of ultimate meaning and value. What makes Peck's approach unusual is his willingness to use scientific, psychological language to discuss spiritual concepts. For instance, he describes grace, traditionally considered a theological concept, as observable in clinical settings, manifesting as the mysterious force that seems to work in people's lives beyond their conscious efforts. Central to this section is Peck's model of human development, which he organizes into 4 stages. Stage 1, chaotic, antisocial. People at this stage are unprincipled and often use lies and manipulation to get what they want. They externalize blame and avoid responsibility. Stage 2, formal institutional. This stage involves strict adherence to rules and structures. People here find security in black and white thinking and institutional authority. Stage 3, skeptic, individual. At this stage, people question institutional answers and seek personal, scientific explanations. They value rationality and often reject traditional religious frameworks. Stage 4, mystical, communal. The most mature stage integrates the scientific mindset with a renewed appreciation for mystery and paradox. People here recognize the limits of purely rational approaches and develop comfort with uncertainty. What's fascinating about this model is how it reframes the relationship between science and religion. Rather than seeing them as opposing forces, Peck suggests they represent different developmental stages, with the most mature individuals integrating aspects of both. Peck offers compelling case studies of individuals moving between these stages. For example, he describes fundamentalist religious believers, stage 2, who experience crises that force them to question their rigid beliefs, propelling them into a period of skepticism and scientific thinking. Stage 3. Some eventually move to stage 4, where they retain critical thinking but regain appreciation for spiritual dimensions of existence. This developmental model helps explain why discussions between people at different stages often prove frustrating. Someone at stage 2 speaking with someone at stage 3 isn't just disagreeing about facts. They're operating from fundamentally different worldviews with different criteria for truth and authority. Peck also addresses what he calls legitimate suffering, the necessary pain involved in growth. He argues that many psychological symptoms arise not from trauma alone, but from resistance to the growth that trauma might catalyze. Depression, for instance, often signals a needed death of outdated aspects of the self that must be surrendered for new growth to occur. This perspective offers a profound reframing of mental health challenges. Rather than seeing symptoms purely as problems to eliminate, Peck suggests they might also be signals of developmental opportunities, painful but potentially transformative crossroads in our journey. Part 4. Grace, the mystery beyond effort. In the final section, Peck explores what lies beyond our conscious efforts at growth, what religious traditions have called grace, synchronicity, or providence. This is perhaps the most controversial part of the book from a strictly scientific perspective, yet many readers find it the most profound. Peck defines grace as a powerful force originating outside human consciousness that nurtures the spiritual growth of human beings. He acknowledges this concept poses challenges for the scientific worldview, but argues that its manifestations can be observed empirically in human lives. What's distinctive about Peck's approach to grace is his refusal to adopt either a purely religious explanation, attributing everything to divine intervention, or a purely psychological one, reducing all experiences of grace to unconscious processes. Instead, he maintains what we might call a both-and perspective, suggesting that the unconscious mind may itself be a vehicle for something that transcends individual psychology. Peck shares remarkable case studies from his psychiatric practice where patients experienced seemingly miraculous transformations, synchronicities, or insights that couldn't be fully explained by therapeutic technique alone. These moments often occurred precisely when both patient and therapist had reached the limits of their conscious efforts. One example involves a woman who had particularly vivid dreams that contained guidance neither she nor Peck could have consciously generated. Another describes a man whose life circumstances rearranged themselves in improbable ways, following a profound psychological breakthrough. Peck doesn't insist these events prove supernatural intervention, but he does suggest they point to dimensions of reality that our conventional models might not fully capture. This section also addresses what Peck calls the problem of evil, how to reconcile the existence of suffering and malevolence with the idea of a loving God or a meaningful universe. Rather than offering pat theological answers, Peck approaches this question through the lens of his developmental model. Different stages of growth, he suggests, will naturally produce different understandings of evil and suffering. For those at stage 2, evil is simply breaking the rules established by authority. For those at stage 3, evil might be reconceptualized as psychological dysfunction or social conditioning. At stage 4, Peck suggests, we begin to recognize evil as that which opposes growth and love, a force of entropy or anti-life that manifests both within ourselves and in the world. Peck closes the book by returning to his opening statement. Life is difficult, but now transformed through the journey we've taken. Yes, life is difficult, but that very difficulty, when approached with discipline and love, becomes the vehicle for our growth. The challenges we face aren't obstacles to happiness, but opportunities for evolution toward greater wholeness. The impact and legacy of The Road Less Traveled. Before we conclude, it's worth reflecting on why this book had such extraordinary impact when it was published, and why it continues to resonate today. The Road Less Traveled spent an unprecedented 694 weeks over 13 years on the New York Times bestseller list, one of the longest runs in publishing history. I think part of its enduring appeal lies in its integration of seemingly opposing traditions. Peck offers psychological depth without reductionism and spiritual insight without dogmatism. For those disillusioned with both traditional religion and materialistic science, the book provides a third way that honors both perspectives, while transcending their limitations. The book also strikes a delicate balance between challenge and compassion. Peck never sugarcoats the difficulties of growth or offers easy answers. Yet his clinical examples consistently demonstrate profound empathy for human struggles and respect for the courage required to face them. Perhaps most importantly, The Road Less Traveled offers a coherent framework for understanding not just how to solve particular problems, but how to approach life itself. In an age of increasing specialization and fragmentation, Peck's integrative vision provides a compass that orients us toward genuine growth rather than mere adaptation or comfort. Critiques and considerations. No exploration would be complete without acknowledging critiques of Peck's work. Some readers find his developmental stages too hierarchical, implying that certain worldviews are simply more advanced than others. Others question whether his integration of psychology and spirituality blurs important distinctions between these domains. From a clinical perspective, some mental health professionals argue that Peck sometimes overemphasizes individual responsibility in situations where structural factors play significant roles. And from theological perspectives, some find his concept of God too abstract or impersonal. These critiques have merit and invite us to engage with the book critically, rather than accepting it as the final word. Yet even critics generally acknowledge the work's sincerity and depth. Peck isn't offering simplified solutions, but honestly, wrestling with life's fundamental questions. The road goes ever on. As we wrap up our exploration of The Road Less Traveled, I'm struck by how contemporary it still feels despite being written over 4 decades ago. In our current cultural moment, characterized by quick fixes, algorithmic solutions, and instant gratification, Peck's message that growth requires discipline, love requires effort, and depth requires facing reality seems not just relevant, but urgently needed. The road less traveled that Peck describes isn't an easy path. It involves confronting our limitations, questioning our assumptions, and accepting necessary suffering. Yet it promises something our culture increasingly lacks, not just success or happiness in conventional terms, but genuine depth and meaning. What I most appreciate about Peck's vision is its fundamental optimism without naivety. He never denies life's difficulties or human frailty, yet he maintains unwavering faith in our capacity for growth. The very challenges that might seem to defeat us can, when approached with courage and openness, become the soil from which our fullest humanity emerges. In closing, perhaps we can return to Robert Frost's poem from which the book takes its title. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Peck's contribution is to show us what taking that road actually entails. Not just a one-time choice, but a lifelong commitment to growth, truth, love, and ultimately grace. It's a challenging journey, but as millions of readers have discovered, one that indeed makes all the difference. Thank you for joining me for this exploration of The Road Less Traveled. Until next time, may you find courage for your own journey, wherever it may lead.